against Joseph Penny.
And we actually do know what David Ochoa is playing. Grixis Death's Shadow, a very, very popular deck in Modern at the moment, JVL.
Yeah, now this is, again, he's trying to deal himself damage. Much like the deck we saw Reed Duke playing in the last match that we watched of Modern. And he's going to be casting Death Shadow. He's going to be attacking the opponent. And in the meantime, he has a lot of disruption. He has cards like Thoughtseize. He has cards like Inquisition of Kozilek. He has tons of spot removal. His deck is an even more disruptive version of the deck that we saw from Reed Duke.
And there we see a Thoughtseize there from David Ochoa after dealing himself quite a bit of damage. He's already at 15, a Street Wraith in the graveyard. Getting a look at Joseph Penny's hand. Well, I think we know what he's playing.
It looks like Joseph Penny is on Affinity. And what the Affinity deck wants to do is it wants to empty its hand quickly of really aggressive artifact creatures. And then it relies on one of 12 to 16 really powerful top-end effects that make the rest of its cards much more powerful. So we see one of those cards in Penny's hand right now in the form of Arcbound Ravager.
Another example might be something like Cranial Plating.
Absolutely. Cranial Plating is another big one. Steel Overseer is another big payoff card.
How do you like the matchup between Death Shadow and Affinity?
So this matchup is very much dependent on whether or not Ochoa is able to draw a decent amount of spot removal and whether or not his discard spells are able to pick out those particular 12 cards from Penny's hand. Because if Penny can, have a Ravager in play or have a Plating in play or have an Overseer in play, things get really hard for David. Otherwise, his spot removal spells are really good and he can just kill Penny before Penny's army of 1/1s or 2/1s really matters too much.
Yeah, and he did actually take the Arcbound Ravager with that Thoughtseize. By the way, there you see it in Penny's graveyard. And Penny's going to try and get out fast and furious here before Ochoa can assemble what he's trying to do with his Death Shadow. Affinity, of course, a deck that's able to kind of dump its hand onto the battlefield turn 1 or 2 and wants to swing for the fences.
Yeah, something interesting to note here is Penny, his hand with a bunch of things that he could cast for 1 mana and one thing that he cast for 2 mana is a slow draw for Affinity.
Yes, it is. All right, that Vault Scourge is going to hit the bin. One of those really nice spot removal spells, Fatal Push that you were talking about from Ochoa there. Just a couple of Signal Pests in play for Penny at the moment. Ochoa continues to effectively hit himself in the face with damage.
Ow.
Why stop hitting yourself? Stop hitting yourself.
Is it David Ochoa?
Oh boy. I knew that's why you were here, Rich.
just here for the jokes. Sorry, air quote, jokes.
We should mention that, in case you're wondering, Jerry Thompson is playing Standard, and Thompson-Ochoa-Utter-Leyton is our Legacy player.
And also, for those of you who, like me, are a little bit OCD, worth mentioning, there are a couple of errors on our life bar, which we can't do anything about because this is on recording. So Jerry Thompson does have an H in his surname, shortly after the T, in fact. And this is not Grand Prix Leon you're watching. You are indeed watching Grand Prix Santa Clara. And the first against the fourth, well, that's from the last time we used the team event, which was the semi-finals or the finals of a team Grand Prix. So we'll get that cleaned up for round number 2.
I'd like to think we're in France right now, Rich.
Yeah. Well, we'll be backing GP Leon before you know it. That's
true.
only next month, right? I think that's the back end of February. Gino CID3 says, did PGO win Peach Garden Oath? Owen Turtonwild, Reed Duke, William Jensen, they did indeed win their opening match on the front table. And now we're in Time Walk, which means this happened earlier this morning. We are currently about 10 minutes left in the round itself, and we're showing you from the get-go coverage of Ochoa against Penny in Modern.
All right, we're seeing a dismember here from Ochoa on one of the Signal Pests after a Arcbound Ravager here from Penny. One of the heavy hitter cards that's really crucial to Affinity's game plan.
Yeah, now Arcbound Ravager is particularly strong against a deck like Grixis Death Shadow. I think it's actually Affinity's best card in the matchup. It makes all of their removal spells dramatically worse by allowing the Affinity deck to dump all of their lesser cards into power and toughness on something that might matter. And this could pose a big problem for David Ochoa here, the fact that this Arcbound Ravager was able to be drawn and successfully cast by Penny on this turn.
And there we see an activation of one of Penny's lands, an Ink Moth Nexus, which becomes a 1/1 artifact creature with flying and infect until end of turn.
Yeah, now, Inkmoth Nexus was a great boon to Affinity Strategies when it first got printed, and the reason is it gives them another route to victory and oftentimes allows them to just one-shot opponents with cards like Cranial Plating and or by sacrificing a whole bunch of things to a card like Arcbound Ravager.
Because, of course, with poison, you only need to take 10 damage as opposed to 20. Ochoa at 8 life, and now 2 poison currently.
Yeah, another thing that it does for the Affinity strategy is it weakens life gain against them. They're a really aggressive deck. People might play cards like Lightning Helix to help themselves survive a little bit longer. Those life gain cards don't do anything against the Infect Inkmoth Nexus.
So does Ochoa have any way, you mentioned his spot removal, does he play any cards that can deal with a lot of things at once from something like an Affinity deck?
I don't believe he does in his main deck. Post-sideboard, sometimes they do. I believe Engineered Explosives is the most common.
Oh, yes. Another Dismember here from Ochoa. You're going to see an Arcbound Ravager. You're trying to gobble something up.
And see, right now we're about to see why Arcbound Ravager is so strong in this matchup, or we're going to see the game just end in Ochoa's favor, because Joseph Penny now, he has a lot of cards in play that don't really do that much. His Arcbound Ravager is being targeted. He is somewhat inclined to sacrifice almost his entire board to that Arcbound Ravager and then make his Signal Pest absolutely gigantic.
And that's the thing with Arcbound Ravager. You don't really have to do anything. You just have to sacrifice an artifact. You don't have to pay. Down it goes, and a giant Signal Pest for Joseph Penny.
I mean, giant-ish.
Bigger than it ever dreamed it could ever be.
That is probably true.
Tapped out, David Ochoa. There's a Cranial Plating.
Wow.
Equip it and swing for Joseph Penny. Count up that damage.
6 damage, putting David Ochoa down to 2. Dangerous place to be.
Bet you don't want to cycle any more Street Wraiths.
No Galvanic Blasts, though, from Penny, I guess.
Suppose not. That would just win the game on the spot right now.
He's got there.
All right, Ochoa's going to scoop him up. Game 1 goes to Joseph Penny.
All right, so that was Affinity taking care of Death Shadow, so they will get ready for their game number 2. Looks like both the other games at this point in the round were still playing their game 1. We'll find out. In fact, there goes game 1 to Andrew Murch. That was in the Legacy match, so Andrew Murch against Josh Utter-Leyton, 1-0. So the underdogs firmly in control in the early stages of this one. Penny 1 up, Murch 1 up, and Josh Carter still playing against Jerry Thompson. So now we wait to find out where our intrepid team took us next for the next game. Maybe we stay here for the second match. We're watching this as if live right along with you. A reminder that because it says Time Walk on the screen, that means that we are not actually live. We are currently just about at time on the round in round number 1. Which means that if they're still playing in the feature match era, they will be being called for time roundabout now. But we are round about 30 to 35 minutes behind the live action in order to show you this complete second match in our feature match area.
Something that I think is kind of interesting here is Ochoa playing Grixis Death Shadow, Josh Utter-Leyton, our legacy player here in this trio, playing another Grixis deck, Grixis Delver, which is an extremely popular legacy deck.
Absolutely. So, I mean, we've double Grixis strategy.
Come on, Jerry Thompson gives us the third Grixis deck in Standard.
I think Jerry Thompson may have played the Grixis colors in Grand Prix more than any other player in the world also up until this point. There's definitely a possibility that that's the truth.
Team Trios is a very unusual format. This is the first time we've covered it. We'll get to that in a minute because here's game number 2 underway. There's a Delver of Secrets in play for Josh Utter-Leyton. Brainstorm just being cast or has just finished resolving it by the looks of things for Andrew Murch, who is 1-0 up. A reminder, because this is the bottom match of 3, that means it's Legacy. Standard on top, Modern in the middle, Legacy on the bottom, small, medium, large. And here is Josh Utter-Leyton revealing Maria, the Delver secret. So it turns into an insectile
Aberration.
Okay.
Yes, look at it and its creepy little insect arms. Revealing a Brainstorm, too, and we just saw one resolve from Murch, and that's kind of a critical card in Legacy that I recently learned. JVL, give us just a quick recap why this card is so important to this format.
So Brainstorm is one of the most important cards in Legacy. It may look like, oh, you draw 3 cards and put 2 back on the top of your deck. That lets you get pretty deep and see what's going on. But then your next 2 draw steps aren't cards you're very excited about. In a format like Legacy, Brainstorm can be played alongside fetch lands, which we talked about earlier, to shuffle those cards that you don't need away. It can also be used in response to cards like Thoughtseize and or Inquisition of Kozilek to hide cards in your hand. And in a deck like Miracles, it can even set up things like Entreat the Angels or Terminus. It has so many applications in this format. Really one of the best cards you could possibly play with.
It's basically the iTunes because it has so many apps.
Yeah. Exactly.
You could say it was the Applebee's. Oh! High five myself on that one.
I'm glad you were there to do that. I didn't even understand that one.
I guess it's an American thing.
Yeah. You don't call appetizers apps?
You know, like your mott
in the
sticks.
old country?
Do you mean hors d'oeuvre?
Are you talking about whore's divorce?
Hors d'oeuvres. You didn't even pronounce it right.
I'm a bit of a connoisseur.
Oh, boy.
A true connoisseur, not connoisseur. Oh, my God. Multi-language coverage for you, ladies and gentlemen. Queen's English and American English right here. In round number 1, you're watching Interview Launch with Rich Hagan. That's me. Maria Bartholdi, say hello.
Hello.
And Jacob Van Lunen, say hello.
I'm here.
There we are. So now you can identify the 3 voices because we do all sound very much alike otherwise.
Maria sounds like she's worked at an Applebee's before. Not true. But I did work at a Chi-Chi's. 2 Force of Wills in hand for Josh Utter-Leyton. Exiling a force, something that you can see. He's going to swing in with that Insectile Aberration for 3, though.
And again, we talked about it last round a bit. This matchup does favor the Delver player, even though Murch is ahead of the game. And in the last match we watched that was this particular matchup, William Jensen on the Show and Tell deck won 2-0.
Is that what Murch is on right now?
Yeah, I believe Murch is also playing Show and Tell deck.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. It's a matchup we may end up seeing a lot of this weekend. These are 2 of the most popular decks in the format.
And there we see a Gurmag Angler enter play for Josh Utter-Leyton. Murch is just going to pass the turn right back. Plenty of power on the board there for Josh as well. And Legacy has a lot of ways to counter spells quite easily. Does it have ways to deal with a lot of attacking power coming at your face?
It does. However, Andrew Murch's deck is not well set up to fight against a card that has 5 toughness. His removal spells will likely be in the form of cards like Pyroclasm and or Lightning Bolt, which could both deal with either the Delver of Secrets and or Deathrite Shaman, but he would really need 2 spells to deal with a card like Gurmag Angler. So his main route to victory, once those cards get into play and start attacking him, is essentially just to get one of his gigantic attackers into play and to finish the game off.
And there we have it, Josh Utter-Leyton taking down Game 2 versus Andrew Murch. The first win for the team of Thompson-Ochoa-Leyton, as Carter-Penney-Murch all have a win in their column as well.
Yeah, and pretty important because of that. It was 1-0 to all 3 of the underdogs, Josh, Joseph, and Andrew, claiming game number 1. But Josh Utter-Leyton tidies up game number 2 with that Gurmag Angler and pals. So we are going to head now back across town, back to Modern. And in that time that we were over at Legacy, well, absolutely nothing happened. But you see Joseph Penny there scrying. That means there was mulligan, but only 1. We've got 6 cards in hand. We can see a cranial plating in there, and that's potentially one of the key cards in the matchup.
Yeah, from the looks of it, Penny's hand relies very, very heavily on that cranial plating.
Oh, yes. We've got an Ornithopter in there as well. Ochoa on Grixis Death's Shadow. Kind of a tricky deck name to say. Has a lot of, as you mentioned, spot removal. Hopefully we'll see this time if he can bring in something like engineered explosives to deal with the team that Penny is able to assemble. Mox Opal here for Penny as well. Able to get that plating right out onto the table. Ooh.
Wow.
Goodbye.
That's an exciting card. Ceremonious Rejection.
It is rejected.
Yeah.
Down goes the cranial plating. What a wonderful counterspell and an answer to a card like that in Modern. 1 mana. Here's an opt.
An exciting new addition to the Modern canon.
Yes. Yes. Wonderful at countering some of the things Tron is trying to do as well.
Absolutely. And one of the cool things about opts, it's actually seeing play over Serum Visions in a lot of different decks that want to leave their mana untapped to interact with cards that are counter magic and are instant speed removal.
Yeah, and there we saw it. If he had been tapped out, that planning would have hit the table, and Penny would be in a much better place than he is right now.
We talked earlier about how David Ochoa gets access to engineered explosives in post-sideboarded games. That card is tremendously important in this matchup. We talked about the 12 most important cards in the matchup for Game 1, and all of those cards cost 2 mana. Arcbound Ravager, Steel Overseer, Cranial Plating. And a card like Engineered Explosives can do a lot of work in preventing your opponent from ever having one of their most important cards on the table at the same time.
And David Ochoa does, in fact, have 2 in the sideboard, as well as 2 Ceremonious Rejections.
Now, this is a really powerful card that Penny just played. This is Etched Champion. And because Penny has Metalcraft, it has protection from all colors.
Oh.
And a deck like David Ochoa's is going to be hard-pressed to deal with that unless he's able to use a card like Engineered Explosives.
I got to tell you the number of times I've been across the table from an Etched Champion and just sigh a sigh of sadness.
You just feel so helpless. And a lot of the time you're able to get them down to no other creatures, and then you're about to cast that Liliana the Veil and get it off the table, and then they play one of their lands could turn into a creature, and you just sigh.
We understand you're having a few problems with the stream, just lagging a little bit. We will hopefully get that fixed for you. We will see what we can do. I do actually like that line from Root Ganglia. Interesting choice, broadcasting via PowerPoint presentation.
We're dropping frames like we're dropping mics up here.
Oh, dropping? Yeah, very good. All right, looks like it may be getting a little bit better, so sorry about that. Not always in our control. But apparently if you refresh, it's fixed, says Gladio Stricto. Back to the Magic action, where several of the cards that were in play when we moved to our stills-only coverage are still there.
And there they are. Etched Champion and Ornithopter for Penny on the table. Ochoa hasn't stuck anything yet, but has been busy dealing with what Penny is doing on his side of the table.
Now, against this Etched Champion, David Ochoa's best game plan, at least until he's able to use something like Engineered Explosives to get it off the table, is to present a clock that's better than Penny's, forcing Penny to keep that Etched Champion on defense. Now, it's a little bit dangerous because it means that Penny at any point could draw a card like Cranial Plating and turn the tide and end the game very quickly, but it really is David Ochoa's best course of action at a stage of the game like this.
I want to ask if you feel a deck that wants to deal itself so much damage like David Ochoa's deck does kind of starts on a back foot against a deck that wants to be so aggressive, like, for instance, Affinity.
So it's interesting because in many ways, a deck like Affinity that's taking chunks out of your life total early while you're trying to put your removal spells together, that kind of makes your clock really, really fast. And while you might assume that these matchups are bad, they're actually quite good. I think the card that is really dangerous when you're dealing yourself so much damage or taking so much damage is Galvanic Blast, because if your opponent draws more than one copy, you can often die out of nowhere. And those burn spells, especially in conjunction with something like Snapcaster Mage and other matchups, can be dangerous for a deck like Death Shadow, but it likes getting hit. It's like, oh, I like the pain.
Etched Champion getting in there for Joseph Penny. Grumog Angler answering, attacking for 5. Teamer Battle Rage here from Ochoa.
Okay, so this is all about doubling up and essentially then quadrupling up and just sending up so much damage through. It's so much power.
Now, yeah, so this is what we talked about earlier, in that, this Gurmag Angler, having just attacked for 10 damage, allows David Ochoa to apply enough pressure where Penne really cannot attack with that Etch Champion unless he's going to win the game with it. It's just too dangerous. David Ochoa could have a pair of removal spells for the Nexus and the Ornithopter and just win the game on the spot. So now Penne in a situation where he's playing defense with his Affinity deck, and that rarely bodes well.
I was going to say that doesn't. I don't remember the last time I really heard that said. So that's awful news.
Death Shadow also entering play for David Ochoa there.
It's quite little.
It is very small right now.
Ickle.
The tiniest of shadows.
Important to note, though, with that polluted delta on the battlefield, that Death Shadow can, at instant speed, become a 4/4 if David Ochoa needs it to.
And that's something really important for anybody who is ever playing against a Death Shadow deck to keep in mind, is how many opportunities does my opponent have to make this Death Shadow bigger, and by how much?
I got a New Year's resolution now.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. I want to see someone cast a 12/12 for 1 mana, and I get to say, he cast a long shadow.
There you go.
Yeah.
I believe you can do it, Rich.
Well, yeah, but I'm going to need some help from the players.
Inkmoth Nexus.
Any double-digit Death Shadow is a long shadow.
Oh, yeah. The Inkmoth getting in there for some poison damage. Penny assuming that maybe that's the way he's got to sort of change his game plan at this moment.
I mean, it's. I think it's his best course of attack here.
David Ochoa swinging for the fences. Etch Champion going to jump in front of that Gurmag Angler. And here's the question to Ochoa. How big he wants that Death Shadow to be.
Welcome to Lady Ataka, one of our regulars in chat. If you're new to coverage, come and hang out in the chat room. Contrary to what you may have heard, there's some pretty fantastic people in there, and we have a lot of fun hanging out over the course of the weekend. Lady Ataka is one of our finest.
Oh, Penny perhaps reconsidering his blocks here. There you see him doing a little math on the table. How big can this Death Shadow potentially get?
Yeah, and the answer is very, very big. Cards like Street Wraith, in conjunction with that polluted delta there, can turn the Death Shadow into a 5-power creature in the blink of an eye. Then David Ochoa could use a card like Snapcaster Mage and recast that Temur Battle Rage in his graveyard, and suddenly that's lethal damage. So Joseph Penny, if he's afraid of a play like that, might end up double blocking, which would mean that the Etch Champion will, in fact, lose Metalcraft post. Oh, no, it will not. I'm sorry.
But there you see we have a cracked fetch land here for Ochoa. First step in growing that Death Shadow. And like you said, Affinity here very obviously on the back foot. Is there any way that it can kind of turn the game back in its favor at this point?
I think what Penny wants to do here is, if he's able to draw another Etch Champion, he could probably stall the game out for a few turns, depending on what's in Ochoa's hand. And then I think he's looking to steal the game with cards like Galvanic Blast. And I think he's going to need 2 copies of it in order to do that this game, but it could absolutely happen. If he's able to draw, let's say, a second copy of Galvanic Blast and then attack with the Etch Champion, that's going to be good enough.
All right, Ochoa down to 9 currently. Penny on 10.
Oh, is this?
Trying to see what he has in his hand. He's flicking them so fast.
So if David Ochoa doesn't have counter magic, I believe Joseph Penny just found a Shrapnel Blast.
Really?
So he already had a Galvanic
damage?
Blast. Yeah, he has 9 points of burn in hand.
Wow.
And David Ochoa is at 9. Now, an interesting note is that he only has access to 1 red mana with that Mox Opal, but he can produce additional red mana with the Springleaf Trumps. Okay, here comes, is it Staticaster? Now down to 1 open mana. Is this Joseph Penny's opportunity to win the game with burn spells? Is he afraid of stubborn denial in a post-boarded game?
Oof, I am. But, I mean, does he have any other choice kind of right here?
And I don't think that's a card you can play around in game 2, especially when you're in a situation like this.
All right, here's the blast.
Ochoa takes it.
Swing in.
And David Ochoa
Shrapnel
at
blast.
5 life.
There's
Wow.
the handshake. Joseph Penny taking the game over David Ochoa kind of like in the last hour there. That was incredible string of plays.
Now, that's not just game. That is individual match. And normally, you'd walk away and go, great, I just beat David Ochoa. But the match still continues, and we arrive into Legacy with a show and tell on the stack from Andrew Murch.
All right, Spell Pierce here from Josh Utter-Leyton is going to take care of that show and tell. Grixis Delver.
Whew. That was a big moment right there. I mean, if that resolved, that's very likely game and match to Carter, Penny, and Murch.
Josh Utter-Leyton fighting for his team here. Massively behind. Versus
like
the underdogs.
Josh has a pretty good hand here. He has Cabal Therapy. He has a pair of Force of Wills and a Ponder. Things are looking pretty good for Josh Utter-Leyton.
Deathrite Shaman on the table. Or as I like to call him, Dr. S.
Jerry Thompson in Standard, not sure what that matchup is over there, but they've been at 1-0 for a long time.
Jerry's on Sultai energy.
Okay.
So, all right, let's take a look at what Josh Utter-Leyton is going to do with that Cabal Therapy. Oh, 2 Grizzlebrands.
And an Emrakul.
And an Emrakul. Oh, nice.
Yeah. Maybe we should put Teamer Energy up against this. That'd give it the kicking it so richly deserves.
Yeah, I don't think it would do too well against this deck.
This is what we're going to do. For the top 4, we're going to do a jumble. We're going to mix them all up and just see what happens.
Oh, like Secret Santa decks kind of thing? It's
Yeah.
like, I'm going to give you Sneak and Show.
And then it's going to play against a standard deck, just so we can all watch the carnage.
For those of you who do love Standard, actually, never mind. No, for those of you who do love Standard, we will get there this weekend. We promise you it is a 3-format weekend, but we know that so many of you love Modern. That's where we're going to start the bulk of our individual match coverage. Then we'll move mostly to Legacy, and often, as may well be the case in this round, it'll be Standard that actually decides the outcome of the match, because we think Standard may well turn out to be the slowest of the 3 formats.
Here we see a Ponder from Josh Utter-Leyton.
And Josh got a good look at Murch's hand on this turn with Cabal Therapy and knows that Murch's hand doesn't really do much. He has a Force of Will and then 3 creatures which he could put into play with a Show and Tell and or Sneak Attack, but the Force of Will doesn't have a blue card to go with it. He has access to 5 mana, but that Cabal Therapy is looming in the graveyard, so it could always deal with the Force.
Delver of Secrets there for Josh Utter-Leyton. Blood Moon was the draw for Andrew Murch and will, in fact, be the play here.
So all the non-basics turn into mountains.
Sad. And they were such lovely non-basics, too.
I love Blood Moon.
Oh,
Blood
how
Moon.
could you?
Oh, man.
So just remember
keeps us
that Josh
honest.
Utter-Leyton has to win this game to keep Thompson-Ochoa and Utter-Leyton alive in the match. What happens for Jerry Thompson is not relevant if Josh can't win this one. But again, if Josh Carter wins game 2 off camera in Standard, that will be match as well, because Joseph Penny is over David Ochoa.
All right, in comes the Insectile Aberration and Deathrite Shaman getting dirty there into the red zone.
Now, Josh Utter-Leyton just with 3 mountains in play because of that Blood Moon. However, Force of Will does not require you to have colored mana if you're going to exile that other copy of Force of Will. And he could even cast that Diabolic Edict by tapping the Deathrite Shaman if he had wanted to.
Well, that's a good point. Lotus Petal was a play there from Andrew Murch. who's staring down a bit of a clock from Utter-Leyton. In comes the team for Josh. We'll drop Murch down to 10.
Yeah, Josh needing to do some kind of weird math there in some ways, because he can either attack for 4 or 3, but if he attacks for 3, then he gets to tap the Deathrite Shaman and create colored mana.
And there is the handshake, keeping the team alive. Josh Utter-Leyton. 2 games to 1 over Andrew Murch.
So now it all comes down to the Jerry Thompson match. So here's our first look at Standard. And as you can see, there's nothing going on here at all.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's like rumble, rumble, rumble. We've got a Glint Sleeve Siphoner. There's a Bristling Hydra on the Jerry Thompson side. Remember, he's 1-0 down. I doubt the live totals are 2020. I'm sure our live bar operator will have just got straight across to the match and will be just checking up on live scores. Now, blue-white cycling for Josh Carter. He's down to 3. Okay, down to 3 for Josh. So Jerry Thompson looks pretty in control here.
Well, the problem is, now they're at the stage of the game where Drakehaven is kind of taking over, and Josh Carter can, at will, just cycle a card, pay a single mana, and make a 2/2 flyer. If he's able to survive this turn, it seems like it's going to be really hard for Jerry Thompson to squeak in that last 3 points of damage.
Those Drakes, damage from those Drakes really adding up pretty quickly as you're able to cycle away your hand. Another Drake there for Josh Carter.
And something that's really powerful about the Drakehaven deck, especially in the late game, is that when you're cycling these cards and making Drakes, you often find yourself more cycling cards that make more Drakes. So it's redundant. It kind of replaces itself with more 2/2 flyers that replace themselves. So interesting here, we're seeing abandoned sarcophagus from Josh Carter here, and that allows him to cast his cards with cycling from his graveyard. So it's the cast out that it looks like it's targeting that Glint Sleeve Siphoner there on Jerry's side of the table.
Jerry answers with a negate, but it's able to resolve.
Yep, Prevailing Winds.
Wow.
Forcing that one through. Or Countervailing Winds. And Countervailing Winds seems like a strange card. It's not a very powerful card, but it's really important to this Drakehaven deck because it sets up the toolbox of the Abandoned Sarcophagus. Once you have that Sarcophagus in play, it's kind of your win condition. And if you have the Countervailing Winds in your graveyard, then it means you're kind of protected from anything.
Countervailing Winds counter target spell unless its controller plays 1 for each card in your graveyard.
Well, it's time for our first turbo action of the weekend as here's Torrential Gearhulk for Josh Carter. And the reason we're speeding things up is because the last match of round 1 is now done, which means that very shortly pairings will be going up. They'll pair the round, they'll pair it up, and when we will be good to go for lots more Magic action here on MTG Launch with Rich, Maria, and JVL in round number 2. And we're going to try, now we don't know whether this goes to a third game or not, but we're certainly going to try and get you through this second one, and then have someone find out for us who actually does win this match. We'll certainly need to know that for you. There's a handshake, and is that in fact game, set, and match? It looks to me like it might well be.
Indeed.
All right, so 2-0 to Josh Carter over Jerry Thompson, 2-0 to Joseph Penny over David Ochoa. The Josh Utter-Leyton turned out to be a consolation match for the big 3, so they start with a loss. And there we go. Well, let's bring it back to the booth for a minute here if we get the opportunity. That brings our round 1 coverage to an end. Rich with Maria and JVL. For you, we're going to be back with round number 2 very, very shortly. JVL, your takeaway from that match?
My takeaway is that the Drakehaven deck might be something to be reckoned with here this weekend. We've seen it now in 2 matchups I believe the deck does do well against energy decks, and if you have a team of 3 people, it seems really likely that the standard player is going to be on some form of energy, and maybe we'll be seeing quite a bit of Drakehaven this weekend.
All right, so
I'm excited about it.
Yeah, great stuff. Yes, hello in the background. We can wave at you too. Honestly, children. Anyway, welcome along. We are going to take a very short break, do some hair and makeup, especially me, and then we'll be back with round number 2 on MTG Launch. Rich, Maria, JVL saying don't go anywhere.